Hello, my name is Andrew Young, and I'm going to be talking about warfare in the Renaissance era. Not only am I going to be teaching you, the audience, about warfare in the Renaissance era, but I will also be teaching a few friends as well. So, do you guys know about the Renaissance?
Are you talking about the fair?
No, I mean the period of time in which there was a cultural rebirth in Europe from the 14th century to the 17th century.
Oh.
Yeah, things were very different back then. It was a fascinating and complex time. However, it was also a time of kings and queens and land. And there's nothing a ruler wants more than land and prosperity. However, not every ruler got what they wanted. I think it's time I told you boys about warfare in Renaissance times.
Warfare in Renaissance times?
How was it different?
What was it like? Where did it take place?
Those are three great questions to ask when considering Renaissance warfare. Let's first start off on how it was different. First of all, military technology is not nearly as advanced as it is today. There is no radio communication, no fully automatic assault rifle, and no tanks or vehicles. Aside from the cavalry, soldiers would have to run into battle sword drawn.
Did they just use swords and shields?
While Renaissance warfare is similar to medieval warfare, it is actually surprisingly different. Compared to medieval times, Renaissance warfare was highly advanced. While they did still use close-range melee weapons, some very smart people figured out other ways to defeat their enemies. For example, instead of swords, soldiers incorporated pikes, a long spear-like pole weapon that soldiers would use to maintain a defensive position. With many soldiers in formation, they would be able to roll over anyone in front of their pokey army. However, a pike soldier formation had one weakness. It could not easily turn around, therefore making them easy to flank. This meant pikes were only a very small aspect of Renaissance warfare. Armor was also very important during this period of time. It was the armor's job to provide the most protection possible without impairing the soldier's ability to move. Oftentimes, the front line of defense or offense wore such armor. However, another tool of war that wasn't seen as often as the sword or the pike was the newly found artillery. In a war of defending land and seizing land, artillery became the defender's greatest weapon as well as the attackers. It was up to the artillery to destroy soldiers' advancements as well as enemy fortresses. In fact, thanks to the newly discovered artillery, castles and fortresses slowly became obsolete. There was no point cowering behind a huge stone wall that was about to get destroyed by a huge stone rock. Artillery was one of the things that changed war the most. Looking back even further into the past, we can see that man started out with things like the club or the spear, and as technology progressed with man, so did the weapons. Soon after was the bow and arrow, giving range to those in war. Next, smelting was discovered, and metal swords and armor came from its discovery. With the addition of artillery, it changed how wars were fought.
So I have a question. Was there any weapons such as guns back then?
Well, gunpowder was newly discovered during the Renaissance times. Soldiers would use guns, but they were not like the ones we use today. Soldiers often used gunpowder in muskets and cannons, another artillery weapon. However, gunpowder wasn't incorporated until around the end of the 100 Years' War, a war between the English, who had land within France, that the French wanted back. It lasted from 1337 to 1453, and in the end, French forces began incorporating gunpowder into their military strategy. Close after, the French were victorious after such a long war.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just sounds like no matter what happened back then, you'd always just end up dying.
That's true. Warfare is never an easy place. And back in Europe, warfare wasn't the only thing killing soldiers. If it wasn't burning oil from a castle's gate, a boulder from the enemy artillery, or the sword of a vicious enemy, then soldiers would likely succumb to the Black Death. Yes, even during the war, the Black Death was taking many lives. It turned the battlefield into an unpredictable and unsettling place.
Were there any more wars beside the 100 Years' War?
Yes, another important war was the Great Italian Wars, or otherwise referred to as the Great Wars of Italy. It took place from 1494 to 1559. The war was a struggle for power between many city-states from Italy and many major states from Western Europe. During the Great Italian War, Italy saw its fair share of artillery. Charles VIII led an invasion on Italy. He used massive amounts of ballistics to quickly open a way into the enemy stronghold. However, the Italians made use of French-made cannons to defend themselves from the attack. Cannons were still relatively new during this time. Before, the ballistic catapults hurled rocks that would shatter on impact, but thanks to the invention of the watermill, furnaces were able to generate enough heat to melt iron down into a cannonball. This new discovery made sieges on a fortress a lot easier. The Italian wars were a great war to see how much military technology is changing in Renaissance times. The wars that took place during the Renaissance era show elements of skilled combat from the medieval era with the long-range unpredictability of modern-era combat. The discovery of artillery combat and gunpowder changed warfare for the rest of time.
Wow, I feel like I really learned a lot about Renaissance warfare.